Evening.
It'd be hard to lead a song. I don't have a song. I almost forgot it. Wasn't originally planned, but we'll do one more lesson tonight regarding Providence. As a quick review, the final one we did last week was just an overall overview of a lot of the different concepts we looked through in God's providence. We looked through what providence is, how it's different from miracles, how it still showed how God cares for His creation. We looked through different passages in the Old Testament. We looked through Ruth, through Joel, and then last week we spent a little bit of time in Jeremiah, looking at the differences between the cup of wrath during the Old Testament times, how God had to keep His judgment on the Israelites as they continued to continuously fall away from Him, and how it later reflected in the New Testament with the cup of salvation. Tonight, to kind of follow that theme for us as Christians and how God's providence works through our lives, I wanted to look at one final aspect, which is authority compared to God's providence. So spiritual authority, God's authority over His creation, compared to the worldly authority of the governments and things of that on this earth. So tonight, we're going to spend a decent amount of time in Romans. So we'll be in Romans 13. We'll look at a couple other passages as well, but that's where we're going to spend most of the time. Again, that's Romans 13. So as a quick overview, a couple of different things that I looked into regarding this, and just different commentaries and descriptions of how to compare earthly authority to spiritual authority from God. I just wanted to look at a couple different key things that kind of struck me or helped me. So in many different traditions, especially in other denominational world and commentaries, there is an establishment of our earthly kingdom, this world and the governments therein, compared to the spiritual kingdom of God in the church. And so that's going to be kind of where I focus for description and imagery. Primarily, the text that's often cited is going to be Romans 13. We're going to look at that, and then we're going to look at 1 Peter. And we're going to especially look at the passage, there is no authority except that which God has established. We're going to see the logic that's there because of God's sovereign, and how it compares to leaders who rise to power in the government, and how it compares to that providential watch. The government is viewed as a tool of providence in a lot of these passages to restrain chaos, to manage this world as we were given reign over this world, to care for it, and that stability amongst ourselves. But how does that actually relate to God's side of it? Where do we hit that limit, and where do we realize where we fit into His creation and His absolute? So a few different things we're going to look at are going to be subjugation, what it means to be subject to the government, what it means to be subject to God, how we walk through that according to Romans and Peter. We'll look through the purpose of the government a little bit, and then we're going to look towards specifically that render to Caesar principle that's often quoted. So if we look in Romans chapter 13, I would ask if somebody could read verses 1 through 5 as we start today.
Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise for the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For it is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake.
There's quite a few different things we'll look at. But we'll go ahead and start with the first couple verses. Every person is to be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist are established by God. What does that mean to you guys when you read it? How does that apply?
The government makes laws that we should follow. I mean, most of the laws are for safety purposes, or to keep us safe, or keep the populace safe. So we follow the laws. Otherwise, we'd be zooming around the highways and getting. One good example here on Kauai, the Lihui to Kapa corridor in Wailua, that used to be 50 miles an hour. But I don't know if people remember, when you have a head-on collision at 50 miles an hour, that's a 100-mile-an-hour crash. So we had several deaths in that stretch. So now they lowered it to 40 miles. I mean, 80-mile crash is still a hard crash, but they lowered it to 40 miles. And since then, we've really hadn't had that kind of accidents, fatal accident. So again, following the laws to keep ourselves safe.
How would that example tie into God's providence or his care for creation? What kind of thoughts come to mind? For myself, as he pointed out, safety. We are to take care of one another. As a church, we're to love one another, cherish one another, be there for one another. Having that reflected in your government and being able to take care of the community in that sense, to me that seems to match. Is there anything else?
I think maybe knowing that God is above all and he's the one that allows authorities and governments to exist allows me to trust in him, whether I trust in my immediate representatives or government above me. I can still trust in God and know that there's a purpose to all things.
Okay. That actually ties into a little bit later a different question I had. If we look at verse 1 again, the very end, it says, established by God. Is every government that is around the best? No. Is it corrupted half the time? Yes. But we can see, especially in the different examples that we saw in the Old Testament, even the ones that were corrupt or chose to not follow God's commandments, they were still used in God's plan. When we looked at King Nebuchadnezzar, what was the key highlight in him being a servant of God? Does anybody remember?
He was willing to take the children of Israel, and they were being enslaved for 70 years. Because he was the king, right? Mm-hmm. So for those 70 years, God was going to make sure that the children of Israel would, yes, go through that hardship, but God was still there. God could have helped them through that. And it even said through the scriptures that don't worry about the king of Babylon, for he too will get his punishment. But for now, we're going to use him to make sure you, my people, will draw closer to me.
Pretty much spot on. Even though they were being held in captivity for those 70 years, we can see later on through the history that idolatry stopped for the Jews from that point forward. And that being a good aspect and good reset for them. But in the end, the way Nebuchadnezzar treated the Jews and the people, we can see that he still had his consequences for that as well. So that's where there's a difference of established by God. There's always his plan working in the background. Whatever choices we choose to make, whether or not we follow his word or choose not to, even for people in power, he still has the ability, the authority, and the might to work for good. If we follow on in what we read before, let's take a look now at verse 2. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. So, looking back on the what we just mentioned with King Nebuchadnezzar and things like that, now I have a question to kind of poke at. What does it mean when it says, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God? How do you think that plays? So looking at the first half of verse 2, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God. So what happens if the government isn't following God's ordinance?
Resisting the authority is not following what the laws or whatever they set up. So if you don't follow the law, then you're either going to be dead or you're going to kill other people as collateral damage.
Okay.
Right, because you gave us two examples of one being corrupted and one not being corrupted, right? And so that's where it comes. Well, for me right now, that's a hard line because you don't want to deny the law, but yet if they're corrupted, and people are always like, well, they're doing bad and they're doing things that are not morally right. You fight against it, right? You can go through a lot of different examples of allowing alcohol to be legal or certain drugs to be legal, and people fight against it, says no, it needs to be illegal because it can harm you, it can hurt you, if you do all these things. No, you should push back against it. And so where do you draw that fine line of, okay, am I actually disobeying God and how he wants me to handle this, or am I in line, right? Because you showed us that no matter whether it's good or evil, it's still going to work in God's hands to end up being good in the end. So that's, for me, a hard thing to find where that line is of, okay, should I fight against this? Should I not? Should I just rely on God and let it happen?
Yeah. No, I mean that's the biggest pitfall I've had, even in my own. Yes. Okay. And that was probably the biggest part of my study that I was looking at for this was the limitations of obedience and that difference between following earthly authority versus following God's authority. And then the reminder comes up, especially when we look in other passages. What does Galatians 1:10 say? If anybody wouldn't mind reading that.
For do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I still please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ.
So we can see there's a priority. Even if we are to follow the laws of the land, because they're established by God, when they're established by God and they're according to His plan, if we choose to make the choices that don't follow His plan, we can see that consequences happen. He punished King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians in the old times. So that was a key part I wanted to look at when it came to God providing for us, and what Brother Rick mentioned earlier is we can take comfort in the fact that even when our governments go astray, it's not going to stay that way. We can take pride and faith in our God being able to work things out for a better good. So a passage I wanted to kind of read that was helpful for me is, it says as follows. While Providence suggests that God allows certain rulers to be in power, it doesn't necessarily mean he approves of everything they do. This creates a hierarchy of loyalty. The higher law principle is if a government demands on an action that directly contradicts divine law, for example, being told to commit an injustice or renounce our faith or commit a sin, the standard theological response is that one must obey God rather than man. There's a passive versus active resistance throughout history. Believers wrestled with simply whether to refuse to comply, civil disobedience, or actively work to change a regime. The concept of providence is often used here to justify endurance. The idea that even a bad ruler may be serving a divine purpose, example being judgment or finding the people, or a catalyst for future change. And so that can be a hard part for us to accept when it comes to how do we fit into that plan. And I'm not going to have all the answers tonight, but that is something that I suggest for further study too. Is always to try to remind ourselves and identify how do we fit on this world if we're not of this world.
And thank you for bringing that up in Galatians. Because that last part, Paul is saying, for if I still please men, I will not be a bondservant of Christ. So if we are a bondservant of Christ, if we know what God truly wants, then I feel like we can protest and say that's not truly what God wants us to do. We should continue to be like Christ and seek the things that are good to Him once more. I feel like this backs up the point for us to defend, to fight, and say this is not godlike, so we should change our ways. Even though we might not be successful, and we might just have to watch things happen until things change. We don't know when the change will be, but the important part is to show others that this is not godliness, this is not righteousness, this is not what God clearly wants.
Okay. Thank you. Which actually, that reminds me, I kind of got ahead of myself. I was going to reference verse 3 first in Romans 13. Somebody could reread verse 3 again.
For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same.
Thank you. So we can see here the purpose in God establishing people in authority and in government is it's supposed to be for good, as Brother Mike brought up, for safety, for taking care of one another, for doing the right thing, for following God's plan. And here we can see that the rulers are called to do things for good works and not for evil. The fear for being reprimanded should be for actual wrongdoings. And that's what ties into what I mentioned later of what is our loyalty, what's our priority of following God versus the government. Is there any thoughts or anything else? Kind of went backwards fast. Okay. So the next part I asked you to look at then is going to be. Sorry, I lost it. So we read 1 through 5. So now let's go ahead and look starting through 6 to verse 8. Somebody with my read.
6 through 8?
Yes, sir.
For because of this you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law.
So starting in these verses, we can kind of start seeing that the purpose, pretty much the providential design of what it means to have a government, and why we have them. It's not just a necessary evil, but a specific job and description provided by God to do specific purposes: restraining evil, promoting justice, and that accountability, that stability, having that society. So if we look in verse 6, we pay taxes. We devote things to the rulers as needed, and we devote the rest to God. Looking at verse 7, it says, "Render to all what is due them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor." What does that mean to you in your daily life? What does it mean to render what's due for tax? Render custom, render fear. What does that mean to you? You're smiling.
No, because throughout time, people have been disgusted on how they've been treated. And so with this is a hard thing to grasp. We gotta pay our taxes, we gotta pay our dues, we gotta honor people who are rude to us, mean to us. And, it says honor to whom honor and such. We look at it now, we're like, why do we gotta pay all these taxes? This is outrageous. But once again, it's a bigger picture of what you're trying to show us is we gotta follow God, right? And so I'm not, don't mean to skip to verse 8, but my brain was thought of this for a split second. It says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law." My brain, for some reason, like, wait, all I have to do is have love? I don't have to do anything else? Owe anyone? Just love? Well, that's clearly not what he's talking about. And I was like, okay. I got to continue reading what he meant by this. So, as people who are not taught well, they can take that out of context and just say, I just got to have love. That's it. But clearly, we have obligations to different parties.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I'm going to tag on to that. To follow up with what you were mentioning, we can see that contrast of rendering everything that's due to those earthly authorities. We empty out what is expected of us per God's authority, and then the rest we owe nothing. So everything else is left. Who do we render it to? And that was actually a bad way to word it. Is that what's the context? Who are we supposed to render ourselves to primarily? Who is our highest authority, our highest priority?
God.
So here we can see we're listed out exactly what we're supposed to do out in this world and how to navigate being in this world without actually being of the world. And seeing that focus on God's already listed out that everything is established by Him, and we can see that it fulfills the law. When we look in verse 8, everything that's listed out and how it should be when people are put into those positions of authority is per His plan. And so that was a couple aspects I wanted to highlight tonight. Is there anything else anyone wants to say before I go on? Okay. So that was a lot quicker than I thought it would be. I did want to highlight, actually, if somebody wouldn't mind going to Proverbs and read Proverbs 21, verse 1. It's another aspect of rulers who are put in authority.
21 verse 1.
Yes, sir.
The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. Like the rivers of water, He turns it wherever He wishes.
So here you can see God can change our hearts. We see it in other ways too. When we look at the parable of the sower and the different soils, our job is only to plant the seed, but God delivers the growth. Here in this way, we can also take comfort, following in on what Brother Rick said before. God can change the heart of rulers. If things really do get to a point, we're only tested as far as we're able. And God has the ultimate control and ability to govern our lives and to help keep us centered. So the last aspect I wanted to look at tonight, and hopefully it won't take too long, is going to be specifically looking at taxation and rendering. So we're going to look at what's typically called the render to Caesar principle, because that's the most quoted. So looking in Matthew chapter 22, verse 21, that's that key verse. So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and God what is God's. So now that we've looked in Romans and what we're supposed to render, just civil authorities to earthly authorities, what does it mean to give back to, I guess, earthly authorities or Caesar, what's Caesar's, and what's God to God? What does that look like in our lives? Even if it's just a personal example, what's a way that you guys do? What season is it right now? What comes up in April? April 15th, right? I think.
Taxes.
So it is tax season.
What? Taxes.
Tax season.
We're talking about what we have to give to the world, to the government, and so we're in tax season. And so that's one way of our lives that we give back to the government. As according to what you said, render Caesar's what it belongs to Caesar, because Caesar was the king of Rome, right?
Yep.
So he had a lot of power in his hands, and so a lot of people had to give what they had to Caesar if they wanted to live, and so on and so forth. And so you're trying to divide the two lines. Once again, this world, God made the world, but we're not of the world, and so we have to make sure we pay attention and follow authorities of this world, and then we also follow God and what He wants us to do.
To follow on to that, a key aspect that I was going to look at is following that financial side of it. What else are we supposed to set aside financially, but for God? It's an action every week.
Set aside the collection.
Right. So looking in 1 Corinthians 16:1, we're to set aside every week as we prosper. So then, having that clear distinction as what's listed out here and looking in Matthew, if we clearly define what is rendered to the government, we know what belongs to there as needed, and we clearly define what goes to God. There's a healthy aspect to it that allows us to make sure that we always keep our priorities in check. Something that I was always taught growing up is practice having the collection as your primary first bill of sorts or contribution that you're going to give out as soon as you get a paycheck. Enabling that's your first priority of this is how much I'm going to set aside for God, for His church, for Christ's church. And from there, this is how much I have left for bills and such. Obviously, don't give up so much that you can't function in life, but always making sure that before we make the choices of what we want to do, or hobbies, or all those frivolous parts of life, that we put God first. So financially, that was one that came up for me. What's another thing that we give back to God in our day-to-day life?
He gives us time. We're supposed to give time back to Him.
Time. It's like we meet on the first day of the week. We are to pray. And each day is a blessing. We're taught that too. Anything else? Anything else, Mike?
Just the opportunities that we have as well that go along with time. It's just taking advantage of things like there's no law that says we have to come on Wednesday nights, but we choose to come because we want to learn more about the gospel and more about God's will and understanding what He wants from us. And so that we can benefit from that, and we can grow, and we know that when we come together, we please Him. So that's, and looking for opportunities to be an example to the outsiders, to look for opportunities to share with people who've never heard of Church of Christ or Jesus, to let them know why we believe what we believe. You know, that's basically what we're supposed to be doing.
Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Go therefore into all nations and spread the gospel. Kind of going back to one of the previous lessons we did, for a quick reminder and highlight, we looked at the different kinds of providence. There was God's general care to His creation. He takes care of the birds. He takes care of the fish. He provides for life on this earth. Blessings each day with rain, with food, with shelter. But then we looked further and we looked into the specific providence for those who follow Him, those who follow His will, those who seek Him. So looking here, we can see how it ties back on the opposite side of, originally we were looking at, by seeking God, He will better care for us in our lives towards His plan. But now we're looking at it on the other side as well, where we have to render to Him in a proper manner. We have to prioritize Him in that authority in comparison with God. It was an interesting thought that came up when I was looking through this. Looking further, we can see that there's that boundary for disobedience, like we mentioned before, when it comes to earthly authority. It doesn't grant the government that blank check authority. If the government commands what God forbids, or forbids what God commands, the believer's primary allegiance should shift. An example would be Acts 5, verse 29. It clearly is stated by Peter. What does Peter say they must do in Acts 5?
Must obey God rather than men.
If we look in Daniel, we mentioned it a lot. I just never covered it myself. What did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do when it came to following the idolatry from the king?
Same king.
Yeah. They obeyed God, they didn't obey the king. And so they were cast into this giant furnace.
Agreed. And in that instance, what did God do for them?
Save them.
Yeah, protected them.
An angel was sent to protect them. And so those are just the key aspects of how I wanted to look at providence versus authority. Because oftentimes, when you look through and you look at the providence of God, it's treated as a passive concept. And that was a hard thing for me to wrap around when I would hear it often. If God takes care of each aspect of our lives, or is able to take care of us in that way, how does that impact our free will and our ability to always choose Him, even in the worst scenarios? And even to this day, it's a hard thing for myself to grasp. Being a member of the military, there's so many things that I have to follow and do that's even stricter than the standard person. Even what I say, how I speak when it comes to the president, to anybody else in line with that, there's consequences. So how do I navigate that while still being primarily a member of the Lord's Army? And that can be applied to any aspect of our lives too. Any person's going to have their own version of it. But that's just kind of the closing thought I wanted to leave. So the invitation thought for tonight is that reminder to have God as our priority. to ensure that our obedience isn't to just our day-to-day, to the county, to this country, to anything else that gets in our lives. Not even just government, but even the things that we can be enslaved to, that we're addicted to, of hobbies, even if we think they're good. Anytime it comes before God, we're no longer have the right priority. Do we let other things get in the way where we don't get enough sleep to come here? Do we decide to take a nap? Do we forgo actually studying? Do we forgo prayer in our day-to-day? What does our obedience look like in keeping Him at the top? Is there any thoughts or anything anybody wants to bring up?
When talking about this, I'm always brought back to Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. Jesus saying, "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you." The idea that if we always put Christ first and God first, and we're not looking, it's my money, or it's my time, or it's, we're giving it all to God, then we can find that righteousness and that appreciation of God's will and that direction. And it allows us not to just immediately jump off the handle when news of something happens that kind of disagrees with what we personally believe or not. We can always trust in God, and since we're always trying to seek God and put Him first, then it has less of an impact on us.
The primary call that I want to share for tonight and for the rest of this week is, if we don't actively prioritize God in our lives, we're not doing Him the service that we should as a Christian. When we render to God, it has to be an active choice in every aspect of our lives. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes we can get lazy. We can procrastinate. I do it often. I always have to check myself. And so that's what the invitation is for tonight. Is if you guys have hit a point in life where you realize that you haven't been able to keep Him as that priority in every aspect, that's what we're called to as a Christian. That's what we're here for. To pray, to uplift one another, to edify one another, and to put each other back on the right track. If I ever fall short, I would sure as hope that you guys would knock me upside the head and tell me to come back. Figuratively, hopefully. Like nothing too big. I don't want a bruise or anything. And vice versa. And for those who, especially watching, if you haven't been able to be a member of the body, and if you haven't actually made that first choice to be baptized, to be part of that, to follow His authority, there's always an opportunity for that as well. Whatever needs might be for tonight, now's the time, as we sing and as we sing.